what do we think about the idea of a personal AI use policy? Now, hear me out a little bit. Like, if you aren't relying on your job or your organization to do the work to think through what ways you wish to interact with AI tools and technology, what information you're allowed to share, how you want to show up, how you want to represent yourself, like all of those kind of things. Take yourself out of an organization doing all of that work. And obviously, they have a lot more obligations and kind of criteria and legal frameworks they probably have to meet, and probably access to data of which they're, have to have certain things that they abide by. Fair enough, but take all of that away. Like, when you think about your own personal approach and usage of AI, like, how are you anchoring yourself in an intentional approach that feels like it represents you well? That's like maybe something that you haven't thought about or you don't care about, but it's something that I've found like really sitting on my mind and on my chest in the last little while. And what I wanted to do is just read you a little kind of journal entry that I wrote myself in the last week, and then kind of talk through some of the worries or concerns that I think are surfacing for me, and then how I'm maybe thinking about kind of looking at them and picking them up and sitting with them. So, first, let's look at this kind of note to myself. So, the question of policy, ethics, and morals make up a large amount of human commentary when it comes to artificial intelligence. For almost a year, I was part of an AI startup where I explored the latest and greatest tools available for end user and organizational consumption, and took an optimistic and curious view towards AI technology in general. Having left the startup, I started to ask myself what an authentic use of AI is in my life, and how should it show up in projects I'm working on, where I'm advocating for people to consciously exist in gray spaces in life where we curiously explore, but also consciously and intentionally approach topics and activities in life. That led me to reading things like Wendell Berry's essay, Why I Am Not Going to Buy a Computer, which, spoiler alert, he's basically saying, just don't do the thing, avoid the thing, do it the way you've done it before. That's a take. I don't know if it's my take, but it's a take. That led me then to 41 questions posed by LM Sakasis. Now, these are like questions related to technology. They're also like very interesting. I mean, maybe I can like pull some of them up very, very quickly, but like he kind of phrases things really well. So he asks questions like, does the use of this technology arouse anxiety? How does this technology encourage me to allocate my time? What limits does my use of this technology impose on others? Things like this. Very, very well written, very well thought out, very like just interesting to read. And I'll kind of make sure that I link that below so that you can kind of have a look through that if you're not aware of those. But again, kind of has a particular take, which is quite pessimistic in a way. So, okay, have been reading those, to then looking into ethical frameworks and reading about things like Anthropic's AI constitution for Claude, which basically details all of its kind of intentions for Claude in terms of its value system and its beliefs and how it operates in the world and interacts and exists in a way. And then I've already also started to read critiques of that, essentially. And so I'm working through what having a personal AI policy or ethical charter for myself could look like. The intention is for this to act as a guidance for myself when it comes to my personal use of AI, what I choose to utilize it for, how I aim to collaborate with and interact with it, and what I find concerning or how to avoid potential missteps or actions slash interactions with it that would deviate from the person that I wish to be in this world. I adopt one view that is taken from Anthropic's constitution, that in order to have a take on ethics and act in a way which can be deemed to be a decent and kind person, ethical debates and question marks do not need to be resolved or solved in any way, but it's the enactment each day in the ways that I choose to act and operate that demonstrate those values. So the idea there is basically to say, I don't think I need to have a particular ethical or moral obligation or take in a very kind of clear cut, this is how I follow and this is what I do, for me to be able to be thinking about and kind of picking up and feeling out these things. And so what I realized is, I think maybe I've had the realization that having kind of gone full all in on the opportunity that AI offers, which I'm still very much behind. I would say I'm still quite optimistic about the opportunities that AI offers. And also, I would say I'm anchored in some level of realism about, that this is obviously something to question, particularly when there's a lot of open questions that we just don't know enough about and we don't have the answers for. And so I would say I'm still behind my original kind of take, which is curious, optimistic, looking for the opportunities. But I think in going kind of full on that side of things, I think what's surfaced in the last little while is maybe a correction or an overcorrection to that, which is going, well, did I kind of set some things that I find personally important aside so that I could jump on in and just, kind of explore and do whatever? Like, what fears or what worries has me thinking about this so often right now and has me reading all of these different things and trying to kind of consume and collect information? So, what I did is kind of put together some like notes for myself. So I liked the idea of kind of surfacing questions, because questions or the framework around kind of a routine of picking things up and questioning yourself, I find more approachable than, let's say, a fully fledged policy that's more intended to be pulled on when there's an issue, when you need to defend something, when you're trying to set up and organize for large groups of people. I don't know if I need to have a formal policy for myself, but I thought, let me detail out some of the question marks and the fears that I have, and maybe that will turn into something along the way. Who knows? So basically, these are kind of notes to myself, and I've kind of come up with these 7 areas. You'll notice like a lot of them are linked. These will change, I guess, over time. I wrote these out kind of by hand and then had them transcribed and put into like an infographic. So obviously, I'm still actively making use of AI, even when I'm thinking about the frameworks and the kind of things I want to challenge on. But I think that's also representative of kind of who I am. I love to toe the line of like being a little bit hypocritical. I think that's something not enough people embrace, which is the knowledge that like you can have issue with certain things and still actively do them yourself at times. I feel like that's embracing part of being human. But obviously there's lines and there's limits. So if we kind of take a little bit of a closer look into this, and I don't know why I seem to be kind of struggling with my screen to be able to like keep up with this. So let's see if this works. So future harm is that I embrace technology without considering potential adverse impact for the future on my potential children, let's say, or on others, or basically kind of society as a whole. And so the question mark that's kind of anchoring around that is, am I actually thinking about where this leads? So I don't know if you've been watching some movies that have come out or reading news or whatever that are talking all kinds of apocalyptic kind of theories and stuff. Like, I don't know if it needs to go into that direction to be kind of keeping an awareness that I want to have, which is like, yes, you can embrace and use things in the short term, but I do think there is a lot of value to thinking longer term. And I think as a person on this planet, I want to make sure that what I'm embracing and using and exploring, I'm also have a thought for like what the impacts of that can be, and potentially, or specifically when it comes to potential harm that maybe goes outside of myself, but has the opportunity or the potential to kind of have a knock on impact. And that's something I just really wanted to kind of keep in mind. Translation loss. So that somehow, this is the fear, somehow my morals and ethics in life don't transfer to increasingly digital formats where interactions feel removed from humans. So the question mark I have there is, am I acting differently here than I would in person? And so, there's ways and means that I show up based on like my upbringing, based on kind of what I've picked up and learned along the way, and based on what I find important in my own value system and what I try to like role model and people that I respect in life. And so, in acting that out, that's very often in relation to other people in spaces that are increasingly digital. How does that actually translate? Like, how am I embedding those things in formats where you're not showing up in person, you're not speaking with people? And let's not pretend as if we haven't been in a digital world for a long time. We definitely have. But this is the first time I'm consciously thinking about, well, how or what ways is that kind of different than how I would appreciate kind of showing up in life in general. And I guess I do have a bit of a concern around maybe some things do get kind of lost in translation, or they change or they shift. And that's something that I do think I want to be a little bit kind of conscious of. Blindness, that somehow I'm blind to useful questions worth asking about any technology. So this is quite broad, but it's going, what's the question I'm not asking? Obviously, I can't know what I don't know, and I'm not suggesting that I can, but I think the awareness that there's gaps and that there's things that are going to be outside the kind of blinders that we tend to have on in general, that we all have kind of biases for certain things. I think that's just useful to be aware of and to surface, just so that then you're kind of more open to potentially exploring when you get new information, or when there's kind of question marks that are arising. Thinking a little bit outside kind of the current domain is something that I think I would like to kind of keep an eye on, basically. Now, the next one is related to let's say if I move over here, pride loss. And so if I go to this, what this means for me is that I wouldn't be proud of my actions, or would be less proud of myself through the evolving use and relationship to AI. Now, this one's kind of a wishy-washy question. Will I be proud of this in a year? Like, cool, you can ask yourself that for pretty much every question or every thing that you're doing. But I think I'm trying to grasp a little bit of like, how do I keep an eye on and have a measure of like appreciation for and pride in how I'm showing up in my usage of AI. And that's even stupid things like, does it matter that I'm polite? Does it matter how I interact and how I write? If I'm having a bad day and I choose to be kind of irritated with my interactions, is that something that I would be proud of? Because if I allowed myself to do that to a colleague that I would work with or a good friend of mine, I would have to deal with some ramifications of that. With AI, I don't necessarily have that same familiar kind of relational tie, but that still doesn't mean I'd want to be behaving in a way that, doesn't align with how I would operate otherwise. And so that ties in a few different things that I think, yeah, is just kind of surfacing for me as well. The moral laundry of it all, that I use AI to make certain gains, financial or power, otherwise using means I'd otherwise not utilize if enacting them myself. And the question here is, what would I ask a person to do this, pay them, look them in the eye, etc. Now, obviously, this could be like super nefarious stuff. That's not what I really mean. I don't really have a concern for that of me. It's more so kind of a gradual move towards maybe targeting even things like, the information and the way you're gathering information about certain things, like making kind of gains or seeing opportunities or using something to make gains that I otherwise wouldn't feel comfortable with if I had to ask someone to do it for me. Or, if you ask someone to take an action as a person to person, someone, there's a barrier there in that someone can say no if they feel like it's not quite, it's a bit sus. They might refuse to do it. AI, on the other hand, obviously, if it's kind of quite nefarious stuff, there are barriers and there's guidelines and there's guardrails in place that will stop certain things happening. But, you could kind of move into more like harmless things or seemingly harmless things that could kind of move towards this and kind of have you operating in a way, or have me operating in a way that I wouldn't be proud of. And so I'd be afraid if this is something that, I kind of start gravitating towards, which is why I want to kind of surface it and kind of think about it. Relationships. So that over time, AI takes the place of the people I should be reaching out to, and I drift further from them, not closer. The question there is, am I talking to AI when I should be talking to someone? Now, for me, I would say that, I really value community, connection, relationships in my life nowadays more than ever, because I think I've put in a lot of work to try and establish really solid ones. But at the same time, I'm like almost toxically independent. I, don't need nobody for much stuff. I really try to make space to allow people to fill that in. And that's something that I have done quite a bit of work on. But, the opportunity and the challenge with AI is that you have capabilities that previously you would have had to reach out to people to be able to achieve. You would have had to pay people, you would have had to contract, whatever. So, the opportunities to have that at your fingertips and the kind of access that it enables is really amazing. But how does it affect my relationships with people, my relationships to others, my communication? Like, that's something that I think is worthwhile for me to kind of sit with and to be questioning. And then, last but not least, there's this question around friction, that I outsource the bits that were actually doing something for me, the thinking, the struggle, the slow finding of the right word. And the question mark there is the hard bit annoying, or is it doing something for me? And I think the idea with all of these basically coming together is that, I want to make sure that I'm approaching my usage in an intentional way. And I don't want to be replacing my judgment. I love to be figuring things out and like learning information. And as soon as I start outsourcing that or trying to replace, it just isn't the same thing versus like elevating my abilities and elevating the abilities of others and enabling and understanding how certain technologies can be used to achieve things we couldn't before, and to achieve things for the common good, for the benefit of individuals, for the benefit of larger groups. That I'm like, say less. Like, yes, let's do that. But, there is a real concern around, it's very easy for that to fall into kind of lazy patterns where you're outsourcing things that actually are worth the value, and friction has a value that, is worthwhile and can be really, really useful. So I'm going to sit and like ponder these for probably the next few weeks. Um, but I think this is kind of a worthwhile endeavor. And I just, at least, even if it seems really off base or it seems a bit out there, I think this is just things that are surfacing for me right now that I felt like it was maybe interesting or important to share. Yeah, that was it.